Hi everyone, meteorologist Steve Caparata back with another episode of Coast and Climate. Indeed, we like to talk about the coast on this podcast, right? It's in the name. This year's been kind of interesting. We've had a lot of high water events on the Mississippi River in recent years. This year it's a stark contrast, running exceptionally low. So I thought it was a good time to bring in somebody that knows a lot about the Mississippi River. With that, let me introduce Dr. Clint Willson. Thanks for being here this morning.
Oh, you're welcome, Steve. Happy to be here.
Thank you. So you're the director of the LSU Center for River Studies, correct?
That's right.
Really neat facility. I've been in there a few times, but for people that aren't familiar with it, tell us where it is and what it is.
Yeah, so the Center for River Studies, first off, I'm going to say it's a strong collaboration between LSU and the state's Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. So we're located on the Baton Rouge Water Campus, just a mile from here, probably not even that far. Right next door to the CPRA, the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority, as well as Stantec, a large engineering design firm, and then I think Aptum or AECOM, one of those firms is moving into the building across from us. The Water Institute of Gulf is on the water campus, as well as 2 LSU centers. And so it's really a neat, a great opportunity for LSU to have a presence, and work amongst consultants, state and federal agency people, other researchers.
And one of the real showcase items you have there is this massive model of the Mississippi River. Tell us a little bit about that, and I'll roll some video. We'll kind of get a glance at that, but tell us a little bit about that model and its purpose.
Yeah, sure. So, we started actually about 20 years ago with a small model in a small metal building about a mile down River Road, and kind of saw the capabilities that model gave us. It was another tool in our better understanding the way the river behaves, the way sediment moves. And so after about 10 years, we really had an opportunity to upgrade it. The Coastal Protection Restoration Authority had some funding that could be used for education as well as research. And so, we built this new facility, the center, as well as really a much larger, much more quantitative, technically better physical model. And so we used that model to help study how sand moves down the river. And the importance or the reason we need to know that, or the reason we want to study that, is the state wants to optimize, they want to use as much sand as possible in their coastal restoration efforts. And whether that's through dredging of river sand and using that for marsh creation, or whether it's for river sediment diversions, they want to understand how that sand is moving down the river, and not just today versus tomorrow, but next year, the year after that. How do high water, how do flood years impact the way the sand moves? How do low flow years impact that? How does relative sea level rise impact that? So there's a lot of different things that we can study there, with the goal though being providing the state data and information so that they can better, let's say, plan and better operate these river sediment diversions or these marsh creation projects in the future.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the sediment and the sediment diversion. So obviously, up until about 100 years ago, the Mississippi had these natural meanders as it would flood and change its course periodically, and then there was all this natural land building. And then what happened? We had a big flood, and we built these levees, right? And we channeled the river, and that really changed the way that nature operates. And since that time, we've been fighting a battle here in Louisiana, right? We've been losing land. So one of the ways we're trying to fight back are these sediment diversions you mentioned. One of those big projects that's kind of underway is this Mid-Barrett Area Sediment Diversion Project. Tell us what you know about that and why it's important.
Right. So, as you mentioned, and you summarized it wonderfully, that the river and its sediment and the nutrients in the water really built so much of the south central and southeast Louisiana coast, and that's one of the things that we do at the center, is try to educate people about that, help people understand and recognize that the river built a lot of our coast, and that the river is important to maintaining that coast, right? So as you said, the Mid-Barrett Area River Sediment Diversion, as well as perhaps the Mid-Breton River Sediment Diversion that's coming down the road, both of those are meant to reconnect the wetlands to the river, to recreate those processes that really built and or at least maintained a lot of those coastal wetlands. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that the coast was always changing. Before we levied it, it was always changing. The river was shifting. It was during a flood year, it would overflow its banks. The water, the sediment, the nutrients would get out in those wetlands. and nourish that. And then the river might shift 1,000 years later or whatever. And so, as you said, after the 1927 flood, there was a really concerted effort to really look at, okay, we want to make sure that we maintain the navigability of the river, right? It's important. There are a lot of communities, the agricultural community in the Midwest relies upon the river, right, to get their products out. But then we also want to protect the communities and the ports and the industry along the river. And so when we did that, right, as you said, we disconnected those wetlands from the river. And so the Mid-Barrier Terry River sediment diversion is really meant to, in a controlled way, reconnect the wetlands to the river. Maximize the amount of sediment you can get out of the river, for a period of time when the river's up in its kind of winter, spring flood. Do that and then close the gates off, and minimize the amount of water that's going into the bay.
And so we've seen a little bit of this, how it's supposed to work naturally in action, right?
Yeah.
With the Wax Lake Delta, right? Off the Atchafalaya.
Exactly.
Tell us a little bit about that. And is that maybe a good example of nature doing its thing and what we need to kind of aim for as we try to recapture some of our coast and build some new land?
Yeah, and I think, the Wax Lake is a perfect example of what the river can do, what a river delta is. And I think there's obviously differences between the Wax Lake Delta and what Mid-Barrier Terry is going to do, or what Mid-Breton River sediment diversion is going to do. But I think there are enough analogies there, and there are enough things that we've learned from Wax Lake Delta in terms of the sediment moving out of the river, and when it gets in that open water, what's that sediment going to do? Where's the water going to go? Are there going to be areas that maybe are actually degrading a little bit for a period of time while others are building up? And so, really helps, I think, serve as a wonderful example of the dynamics of that land building process. And so, there's a lot of research that's gone on in the Wax Lake Delta that's really helping us understand what's going to happen, or what do we believe is going to happen when we start operating the Mid-Barrier Terry River sediment diversion.
So one of the battles we're kind of fighting here in Louisiana, it's really a two-pronged battle. We know with climate change, sea levels are rising, and that's a coastal problem all over the world. But we've got another issue. We've got the subsidence along our coast. Can you tell us why we're dealing with that subsidence, and how the Mississippi and the Delta are kind of, how that comes into play with that subsidence that we're talking about, that sinking?
Right. Yeah, and I think, every delta in the world sinks, subsides. So it's not something that's just unique to the Mississippi River Delta. And there are other coastal areas and other, areas in the world that are subsiding. But in particular, deltas themselves, river deltas subside. And that's because of probably half a dozen different geological processes, and so it makes it, first off, very complex, because it's not the same everywhere. There's different amounts of sediment, there's different types of sediment when you go down and look at the geology under the delta. And so, again, kind of starting with that, every delta subsides, so that means that we're always facing that subsidence, right? So even if sea level was not rising, the land would still be sinking. And so that really goes back to then the acknowledgement and the need to get the river back into those wetlands, because the river, its water, its sediment, its nutrients are what help keep deltas, or let's say help deltas keep up with the subsidence and or sea level rise. Right? So the land is sinking, but if you can continually nourish those wetlands, that vegetation, and you have kind of the natural kind of ecological process that occur, you can get more deposition of organic matter. If you have sediment that's coming out of the river, it can build up and kind of offset the land that we're losing. And so that's really an important part to understand the way the river build it, the way the rivers typically maintain deltas. Okay, if not actively building, a lot of times they're just maintaining what you have, and that's because they're able to offset that subsidence.
So what can we do to kind of counter some of that subsidence? So obviously it's a huge problem for us. What can we do? Well,
there's really nothing in terms of stopping the subsidence. I think it's acknowledging that it's occurring, understanding where it's occurring at higher rates than other places, and thinking about, okay, what does that mean in terms of our projects? Right? There are areas that are subsiding so much that really there's not a whole lot of hope in terms of building or maintaining land in those areas. So what you have to do is you have to step back and say, okay, how do we optimize the projects? How do we optimize the resources, the money, the river water, the sediment, the nutrients, right? And that's really what the state's doing. CPRA has an incredible coastal master plan that's based on science and engineering, and they're looking at What are the subsidence rates in different areas of the coast? What are the different types of projects, whether it's just getting fresh water back in the wetlands, or whether it's river sediment diversions or marsh creation projects. So there was really no way to offset the subsidence. It's more about acknowledging that and then looking at, okay, how can we hopefully understand how that's, whether that subsidence rate is going to continue, whether it might increase or decrease into the future, and then optimize the projects and the work we're doing.
When we talk about the Mississippi Delta, there's something that's pretty interesting. You go not that far to the northwest of Baton Rouge. I got the chance to visit a few years back the Old River Control Structure. This is kind of about balancing the flow between the Mississippi and Atchafalaya, but you're the expert. You could do a better job explaining it than me. So explain to everybody at home what the Old River Control Structure is all about and why it's there.
Yeah, a lot of people don't necessarily know a lot about it, and it's one of the critical economic infrastructure. It's one of the most important economic infrastructure pieces we have in the country, particularly in the Midwest, because the Old River Control Structure is put in place, to keep the Mississippi River from, at some point, perhaps moving towards and fully down the Atchafalaya River. And obviously, the infrastructure, the communities, the ports, all of that we have along the Mississippi River is just so critical to our state's economy, the nation's economy, and some, you might argue, the world's economy. And so having that Old River Control Structure in place keeps the Mississippi River in its current course, right, the current path. And it's important, again, also because from a flood control standpoint, because again, now we have to start thinking about, okay, when those floodwaters come down, the Mississippi River Basin drains 42% of the continental United States. And so that's a huge amount of water, whether that's coming down from rains in the Ohio Basin or snowmelt in Upper Miss. And so the Old River Control Structure, not just keeps the Mississippi River in its current course, but it also serves to mitigate or reduce the flood risk, along the lower Mississippi River. And so, it's just a critical piece of infrastructure that's important that we maintain that infrastructure. We acknowledge how important it is.
There was a big flood in the 1970s. I forget the year, was it 72 maybe? So. And one of the structures there was close to failing, as I understand it, from the little bit of history lesson I've had in my visit up there. And there was some concern if that had failed. We could have had that change in course, right? With the Mississippi River, the Atchafalaya maybe capturing it. Do you think that's anything we need to worry about going forward? Do you ever see that being a potential doomsday scenario of the Atchafalaya capturing the Mississippi? Because obviously if you lose the Mississippi, what happens to Baton Rouge, New Orleans, and everything in between?
Well, I think, the last point you made is why, not that the system could fail, right? But I don't think, we would not let it get so far that the Atchafalaya River would be able to capture the Mississippi River. I think even if there were some failures or some issues there, right, I think there's enough that the Corps of Engineers could do to make sure that the Mississippi River continued down its current path. And so, in the river, when we talk about the river shifting courses and these major shifts that occurred, they didn't occur just in 1 year, right? They occurred over decades. Okay, and that's really what the Corps of Engineers and others, and Harold Fisk, a geographer at LSU, mapped out a lot of this and looked at, the time it takes for the Atchafalaya River, let's say, or the estimating or thinking about how long would it take the Atchafalaya River to capture the Mississippi. And it's not, next year it's going to happen. No, it was happening every decade or so. They would look and say, it's getting about 5 or 10% more water than it did. And so that's when they built the Old River Control Structure, was to basically say, okay, we need to stop that before it gets to 50% or 60%. And so, I'm not concerned. I think the Corps of Engineers is monitoring that. There's a lot of efforts going into, making the structural integrity, the way they operate it, the inspections that occur. And if something did happen where, they were not able to control it as much as they need to in any given year, I think there's enough resources that would be put into place to make sure the Mississippi River continues to be the main channel.
On behalf of everybody, I appreciate those words of reassurance on that, right? We need the Mississippi. So being the expert that you are, can you remember a time, this year has been a stark contrast, but in recent years we've had so many high water events. Do you ever remember a stretch like we'd seen over the last decade with so much high water on the Mississippi?
No, and I think that's one of the things that, at the Center for River Studies, that's one of the things we want to be studying and thinking about is, we have a lot of data. The Corps of Engineers, the United States Geological Survey, a lot of people have collected lots of data over time in the Mississippi River. And that's a wealth of information and provides a lot of insights. But then we have to understand that, in the last 10 years or so, it seems like, we have had more high water events. The Bonnet-Carré spillway has been open a lot more than it has traditionally. And so, we're looking at, okay, so into the future, do we expect more of those? Or at least, do we expect more high water years? Or do we expect maybe a clustering of high water years, right? And then maybe a clustering of very low water years. And so thinking about that and making sure that, we're encouraging and working with people who are collecting that data, that then we can use in our work, right, to say, okay, how might that impact the efficiency of a river sediment diversion 20 years from now or 25 years from now? How does, multiple high water years, does that provide a lot more sediment that's available so you can, maybe improve the efficiency of the diversions? So, and then as you said, this year, at least right now, I should say, right, it's very low, right? And, the number of barges they can put and tie together is lower. They can't put as much, goods or products on those barges. And, I know I've been reading about the agricultural communities, pretty stressed out right now because they rely on those barges, right? And they can't afford to put their grain on planes, trains, tractor trailers. They've got to put them on barges.
Yeah, we had a story just the other day talking about that prices. I don't remember if it's grains or what it was, but being impacted by the reduced barge traffic and this inability to move goods in with the same efficiency that we normally can.
Right.
Kind of back to the high water events. You hit on this real quick before I wrap it up with you. I did a flight with this group, Restore the Mississippi Delta, a few years ago during one of the high water events.
Yeah.
And it's amazing when you get up there during a high water event, you can literally see some of that sand and silt that's spilling out as you get down to near the mouth of the river, and where you've got some of these passes. Yeah. And I think that's the frustration for people like you and some of the people working on these projects. The sooner we can get, say, mid-Barataria and mid-Breton going, you want to capture that stuff, right?
Exactly.
We've kind of missed out on some of that the last 10 years, not having these projects in place, right?
That's exactly right. I think that's where, and that serves as a wonderful visual for people to see. Look at the sediment that's going down the river and going out the river that we're not capturing. And I think one thing that, and not to nitpick too much, but one thing, when you look at those maps or you fly over, the delta, that sediment that's going out of the river is actually mostly the silts, the clays, and the muds. Very little sand ever leaves the Mississippi River. Now, as a result of that, the Corps of Engineers has to spend $125, $150 million a year dredging the Mississippi River. They have to mechanically remove sand from the Mississippi River because the river does not have enough power to get the sand out in the Gulf. So that sediment, that sand just drops. So then they have to dredge it to keep the river deep enough for the ocean going, the 45 to 50 feet deep they need for the ocean going vessels to come in and out to get to ExxonMobil, the Port of Baton Rouge, Port of Donaldsonville, wherever it is. And so, but getting people to understand that and thinking about the sediment, those silts and clays, I'm not saying they're not important, right? Because they will nourish, they will help the receiving areas in mid-Barataria, mid-Breton, right? But it's really that sand we want to do. And if we can divert more sand through those diversions, then guess what? That means potentially, and we probably will, the Corps will have to dredge less in the future, which then saves money and or allows them to optimize where they can use that sand along the lower river to kind of fortify the navigation pathway.
See, this is why I bring you on, because I learned something. So as we look at satellite images, that we show them all the time. So what we're seeing off in those satellite images, maybe not the good land building stuff in essence, right? Not the
It's going to nourish. That's what, when I say nourish the wetlands, typically that's where that silts and clays, right? They'll help nourish that. They're probably the organic material that then's important for the vegetation and the habitat, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
So last thing before you go.
Sure.
How can people find out about more for the Center for River Studies? Can they visit? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's a Coastal Protection Restoration Authority, CPRA has a website designed to that. You can go online there and actually schedule a tour. We typically don't have walk-in, so we set up tours for groups. We're going to be starting to participate in the free first Sunday events again. We did one March of 2020, and then obviously about 3 weeks into March, that got shut down. And so hopefully we're going to pick that back up again. You know, and then at LSU, if you go to LSU, if you Google LSU and the Center for River Studies, it'll also take you to a page there. So we'd love to have people come visit. We like to talk about how the coast formed, what we're doing, and also about the important work CPRA is doing, and really using that research that we're doing to, you know, producing actionable data and science that then they can use in their planning and designs.
All right, good stuff.
Good.
And it really is, it's a great facility. We're very lucky to have that. Dr. Clint Wilson, thank
All right,
you so
my
much
pleasure,
for being
Steve.
here.
You're welcome.
Director of the LSU Center for River Studies, Professor of Civil and Environmental
Correct.
Engineering.
Yep.
Got that right,
That's
at
right.
LSU
Yep.
as well.
Yeah.
So thank you again. Learned a lot
Okay.
today. Hope you did at home as well. We'll be back next Thursday, 10 o'clock with a new episode. As always, you can catch these live Thursday mornings at 10 o'clock on WAFB Plus, and then they're posted on our website, WAFB.com, and also our YouTube channel. You can watch them on demand. See you next week.